Hi, I'm Emma. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into my room and smelled smoke. Not thick, choking smoke, but a faint trail of burnt paper clinging to the air like a whisper. I froze, my fingers still curled around the doorknob, eyes scanning the floor instinctively. I didn't need to ask what had burned. I already knew. For the past 6 months, my life had been poured into one thing, my manuscript. I'd written it on scraps of paper in notebooks, typed it out late into the night, saved it in countless backups, and printed a draft just 2 days ago to begin final edits. That draft had been on my desk, bound in a cheap plastic folder, thick with years of effort and every word I had fought to believe in. It was gone now. The desk was bare except for a warped pen and a blackened paperclip. Ash dusted the surface like quiet snow. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat clenched with something much heavier than shock. I turned, walked past my unmade bed, past the cracked mirror that still held smudges from when I cried last week over Chapter 12, and opened the window. The cold air bit into my face. It didn't help. I needed something stronger. I stepped out of my room and down the hall, heart pounding as I reached the laundry room door. That was where the smell was strongest. The small metal trash can we used for lint and paper scraps was still warm. Inside it, I saw edges of blackened paper curling in on themselves. A spine of melted plastic, twisted and charred, poked out from the center like a dagger in my chest. I stared at it for a long time before backing away. It wasn't an accident. My mom wouldn't have touched anything on my desk. She barely entered my room. My dad was working out of state, and I trusted him like no one else. That left only one person. My brother.
Owen.
2 years older, always smirking, always dismissing anything I loved. When we were kids, he used to rip the heads off my dolls and call it toughening me up. Now he did the same thing with words. I should have known this day was coming. He'd been making comments for weeks, asking if I was still wasting time on that fantasy nonsense, or if I'd finally started applying to real jobs. He called writing a hobby, said books don't pay bills, that dreaming was for people who could afford it. I was 23, living at home, working 2 part-time jobs and stealing time to write between shifts. And now the one thing I had left, the one thing that felt like mine, was ashes. Owen was gone when I confronted the trash can. His car was out of the driveway, probably off to hang out with his awful friends or charm his way into another job he'd hate in a week. I sat on my bed and stared at the empty desk. There was no backup this time. I had deleted the last file after printing it to force myself to edit the paper copy. Fresh eyes, I had told myself. Commit to the process. Now that process had been reduced to smoke. I didn't cry. I didn't move. Something inside me had snapped, not with loud fury, but with something colder, harder. It wasn't about the book anymore. It was about the choice Owen made to destroy it, knowing what it meant to me. That kind of cruelty wasn't careless. It was deliberate. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I stayed in my room and stared at the shadows as they crept across the ceiling, thinking. I didn't know what I would do, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to rebuild. And then I was going to make him watch. The next morning, I called in sick to both jobs and drove to the public library with a blank notebook. I sat in the farthest corner of the second floor where no one could see me and began writing from memory. Not the whole story, just pieces. Snippets of dialogue. Scene sketches. I wrote until my wrist hurt and my fingers smudged the ink. Then I wrote more. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my best friend Lena, who would have brought me snacks and cried with me if she knew. I kept it to myself, because that made it cleaner, sharper. It became like a secret fire inside me. And with each page, I remembered more. The characters came back, not as they were before, but clearer, stronger. The book had been my world, and my brother tried to burn it down. But I wasn't gone. I was still here, still writing. Weeks passed. Owen came and went, acting like nothing happened. Once, he knocked on my door to ask if I'd seen his hoodie, and I watched him from my desk, smiling like nothing inside me had changed. I handed it to him with a casual "here," and he took it without looking at me twice. He didn't know I'd already filled 2 notebooks by then. He didn't see the drafts piling up in the storage bin under my bed, neatly hidden behind my old shoes. I didn't need his apology. I didn't even want it. What I wanted was something different now. I wanted to succeed in a way that couldn't be ignored. I wanted to turn my ashes into something so bright, he'd have to squint to see it. That's what kept me writing. 3 months later, I submitted the manuscript to a small indie publisher Lena had told me about. I didn't expect much. But 2 weeks after that, I got an email. They wanted the full manuscript. I sent it. A month passed. Then another email. They wanted to publish my book. I stared at the screen for 10 whole minutes, not moving, not breathing, as tears slipped down my cheeks. Then I laughed. Not out of joy, but something deeper. The satisfaction of knowing I hadn't just survived. I had built something beautiful out of what Owen thought he destroyed. When I told my parents, my mom cried. My dad sent a long message full of emojis and exclamation marks. Owen just raised his eyebrows and said, "So they're actually going to print it? Like a real book?" I nodded. He nodded back, then muttered, "Huh," and walked away. But I saw the look in his eyes. Surprise. Confusion. Maybe even fear. He had underestimated me. And now he didn't know what I was capable of. I let him wonder. That was part of the revenge. The publisher set the launch date 6 months out. I worked with an editor, refining each chapter, polishing each line. I designed the cover myself, something bold and haunting. The story, once a fantasy adventure, had taken on a darker edge after what happened. There was still magic in it, still wonder. But now there was fire too. A warning. A reckoning. I called it Emberlight. A nod to what it was, and what it had become. The pre-orders did better than anyone expected. Turns out Lena had posted about it on her blog, and it had gone semi-viral. A few Book Talk reviewers picked it up and loved it. Suddenly, I was doing podcasts, signing interviews, answering questions about my process like I hadn't nearly given up just months before. When the publisher announced a local book signing event to celebrate the launch, I said yes before I could second-guess myself. It would be held at Inkwood Books, a cozy independent store downtown. I passed it all the time and never thought I'd see my name in their window. But there it was, printed in gold on a poster with my photo and the book cover. Author signing, Emberlight by Ray Halden. That was me. That was my name. Not my brother's. Not my family's. Mine. The night before the signing, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing the table, the stacks of my book, the line of strangers with copies in their hands. I wondered who would come. I hoped Owen wouldn't, but I had a sinking feeling he would. Something about the way he had hovered around my door that week, the way he asked if the event was open to the public. It all felt like something was brewing behind those unreadable eyes of his. He didn't ask to come. He didn't congratulate me. But that wasn't the point. The point was, if he came, I would be ready. Let him stand in line. Let him hold a book he tried to destroy. I would smile, sign it, and hand it to him like it meant nothing. And that would be everything. The morning of the signing, I woke up before dawn. I stared at the ceiling in the dim light for a long time, wondering if this was all some kind of elaborate dream. But the stack of freshly pressed clothes on my chair, the email reminder on my phone, and the fluttering in my chest told me it was real. I got ready slowly, deliberately. I wore a dark green dress that made me feel like I had armor on. I packed my lucky pen, the one I'd used to write those first fragments of the rebuilt manuscript. Then I stared at myself in the mirror for a full minute before leaving. I barely recognized the girl looking back. She looked calm. She looked ready. Inkwood Books was already buzzing when I arrived. A line had started to form outside the door. Some people had copies of the book tucked under their arms. Others were just chatting, laughing, holding coffee cups, and checking their phones. It was surreal. Inside, the staff greeted me with bright smiles and warm congratulations. They led me to a small table near the center of the store, under a skylight that made everything glow. A stack of my books was neatly arranged in front of the chair. A printed sign read, "Ray Halden, book signing today only." My fingers brushed the top copy. It was thick.
Real.
And it smelled like ink and validation. People started coming in almost immediately. The first person in line was a girl about 16. She said she'd read Emberlight twice already. She said it made her feel like she wasn't alone. I smiled and signed her book with a small, shaky heart. More followed. Some readers, some friends of friends, even a teacher from my old school. Every signature I scrawled felt like sealing another piece of the broken past shut. But then I saw him.
Owen.
He stood near the back of the line, wearing a neutral expression like this was just some errand he was running before lunch. He didn't hold a book, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, waiting. I glanced away quickly, heart thudding, but I didn't stop signing. Let him wait. Let him watch. That was the point. I had imagined this exact moment so many times. But when it came, it didn't feel victorious. It felt heavy, like the air shifted slightly. When his turn came, he stepped forward and looked at me like he didn't recognize me. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then he pulled something from his jacket. Not a book. A charred, wrinkled page. The only surviving piece of the manuscript he destroyed. He slid it across the table toward me. I kept it, he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. I don't know why. I stared at the page. It was the ending scene. The final lines of the original story. I knew it because I had agonized over them for days. It was twisted at the edges, half-burned, but still legible. I picked it up carefully. My name was scribbled in my own handwriting at the bottom. Ray Halden. The pen ink had run a little from the fire. He hadn't just burned it. He'd watched it burn. And still, he kept this. I thought it would hurt you, he said. I wanted it to. But I didn't know you'd come back stronger. I said nothing. What was there to say? An apology couldn't erase what he did. But I wasn't interested in apologies anymore. Then he dropped the real bomb. I gave it to someone, he said. That burned copy. Before you rewrote it. I scanned some pages before I threw it out. Sent it to a friend. My stomach twisted. I blinked, heart suddenly cold. What friend? He shrugged like it didn't matter. But it did. Someone who's got a cousin in publishing. Thought maybe it would scare you into quitting. Prove how easy it is to steal something and sell it first. My pulse was pounding so hard I could barely hear him over the rush in my ears. I thought it was dumb fantasy crap, he said. But it got traction. Not for me. But the cousin passed it along. Someone else started shopping it around. Your version is better, obviously. But there's another one out there. A knockoff. I stood up slowly, my chair sliding back. The table shifted slightly, the stack of books wobbling. Someone in line gasped quietly. But I didn't care. The betrayal was back, red-hot and blooming inside my chest. He hadn't just destroyed something. He had tried to erase me. And now, someone else had my words, my world, dressed up as their own. He looked down, finally breaking eye contact. I didn't think it'd get picked up, he muttered. Didn't think anyone would care. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice even. What's the title? He hesitated, then said it.
Chodovember.
My blood froze. I'd seen that name. Online. A teaser trailer on YouTube. A website promising a new dark fantasy series coming soon. I had ignored it, thinking it was coincidence. But now I remember the tagline. A world built from fire and forgotten names. My line. My exact line. The room seemed to spin slightly. I looked around at the faces still waiting, holding their books, smiling, chatting. They didn't know. Not yet. But they would. If Shadow Ember got released, people would see the similarities. Some might even think I was the copycat. My reputation, my credibility, could crumble before it had time to stand. Owen spoke again. I didn't know they'd take it seriously. I thought it'd get buried in the slush pile. It was a lie.
He had wanted this.
Maybe not the full extent, but enough to see me fall. To remind me that he could still touch what was mine. But he wasn't in control anymore. I was. I sat down, smoothed the cover of my book, and looked him in the eye. Get out of line, I said, my voice steady. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. And don't come near me again. Ever. He backed up slowly. I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. Not because I yelled, but because I didn't. He had expected fire, but I gave him ice. As he walked away, I picked up the half-burned page and placed it under the table. Then I turned back to the next person in line, a woman with silver hair and wide eyes, clutching her copy to her chest. "You okay?" she whispered. I smiled. Better than ever. But I wasn't. Not really. I was shaking inside. Because I had just discovered that the battle wasn't over. It had only shifted. After the signing, I called Lena. She didn't answer at first, then called me back in a rush. "I know," she said before I could even speak. "I just saw the trailer for Shadow Ember." "That's your story, Ray. They stole it." "I know who sent it in," I said quietly. She paused.
Owen. Yeah.
A long silence passed between us. Then she asked, "What do we do?" I didn't answer right away. I looked down at the burned page again, the fragment of what used to be my dream. Then I looked at the book in my hand, the one I rebuilt, the one that was real.
"We fight," I said.
"We document everything. I've got timestamps, original drafts, witnesses. That version is a shadow. I'm the source." Lena's voice went quiet. Then she said something I'd never forget. "Then it's time to burn their story down." And that was exactly what I planned to do. The morning after the signing, I sat at my desk, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been a victory. My name trended on a few local blogs, readers were posting reviews, and the publisher had emailed me with early sales numbers that were better than expected. But none of it felt real. All I could think about was that stolen story with my stolen line and the echo of Owen's smug, cowardly confession. I typed Shadow Ember into a search engine and scrolled past the trailer I'd seen before. The website was slick and professional. The author's name was listed as Alara Wynn.
Fake.
A pseudonym. There were no photos, no bio, just a moody quote from the book. "The fire remembers every name it consumes." That was mine too. From an old journal entry I had written during my first draft. I clicked through to the publisher. A newer outfit, mid-tier, not the same one I was with, but reputable enough to attract attention. They had announced the upcoming release date, 2 months from now. The panic sat heavy on my chest, slow and suffocating. 2 months. If this book went out into the world, there'd be no undoing it. No matter how loud I screamed or how many emails I sent, people would question the timing, the similarities. Readers would compare both works, and doubt would fester. I'd be the other version of my own creation. I needed proof. Not just claims. Not just my story versus theirs. Something concrete. That afternoon, I met Lena at a small cafe downtown. She showed up with her laptop and determination in her eyes. I hadn't even ordered coffee before she launched into her plan. She had already dug through old drafts I'd sent her, going back years. Emails, text messages, even photos I'd sent of handwritten pages. Together, we created a digital archive, timestamped files, chat logs, everything. She even pulled voice notes I'd recorded on my phone, narrating scene ideas months before the fire. "I knew this day would come," she said as we worked. "Not the plagiarism, but the day you'd need someone to believe you without blinking." I didn't realize how much I needed that until right then. The tightness in my chest loosened just a little. Lena wasn't just my best friend. She was my shield. The next twist came 3 days later, in the form of an anonymous email. It arrived in my inbox with a subject line, "I know who Alara Wynn really is." The body of the email was short. Just a few lines.
"She's not who she says she is."
And she didn't write that book. Your brother sent the draft to her. She just ran with it. Check the attachments. You'll find what you need. Attached were screenshots. Emails between Owen and someone named Jasmine Wren. Some were casual, talking about that fantasy thing and how it might actually be marketable. Others were worse. Owen bragging about how he rescued the manuscript from his manic sister who thinks she's the next J.K. Rowling. Jasmine replying with comments about how she could make it hers, how if the original author is that unstable, no one will believe her. I stared at the screen, hands trembling. Jasmine. I didn't know her. But she knew me. Knew enough to lie, to steal, to build a name off my bones. And now she had a book deal, a marketing campaign, and a publisher behind her. Lena leaned over my shoulder, reading the emails. Then she whispered, "They're counting on your silence. That you'll be too scared to fight. Or that no one will listen." But I wasn't scared. I was livid. We forwarded everything to my editor and publisher. The legal team responded within hours, shocked but supportive. They started pulling together a case. But even with emails and timestamps, it was tricky. The manuscripts weren't word for word identical anymore. She had changed things, altered scenes, swapped character names. But the skeleton, every bone of the story, was mine. The next week blurred into a mess of legal documents, phone calls, and sleepless nights. My publisher filed a cease and desist letter to Jasmine's publisher. In response, we received a letter from her legal team claiming my book was the copy, that she had submitted hers first. They even included a timeline, Owen's submission email dated before I finished my rewrite. For a terrifying moment, it looked like everything might collapse. But then Lena found the key. An old backup. A forgotten draft stored in her cloud account from over a year ago. It wasn't the full manuscript, but it had the structure. Scene headers, chapter outlines, early prose. And it was time-stamped. Undeniable. We sent it in. And then, silence. For 5 days, nothing happened. The other publisher went quiet. The Shadow Ember site stopped updating. The Instagram posts promoting the book were taken down. And then, quietly, the pre-order links disappeared. No announcements. No statements. Just vanished. I should have felt relief. But I didn't. Not really. Because Owen still hadn't apologized. And Jasmine Wren, whoever she really was still out there. It wasn't over. That Saturday, I received another email. This time, from a reporter. She said she was writing a piece about plagiarism and intellectual theft in the publishing industry and had received an anonymous tip about a story similar to mine. She wanted to hear my side. I hesitated. The idea of turning this mess into a headline made my skin crawl. But then I remembered what Jasmine wrote in that email. If the original author is unstable, no one will believe her. So I said yes. The article ran the next week. It didn't name Jasmine or Owen outright. But it included enough details to make it clear. The emails, the similarities, the false author persona. It told the truth. And it caught fire. Writers started talking. Book Twitter exploded. Fans of Emberlight defended me, while internet sleuths dug into Alara Wynn's background. Someone uncovered Jasmine's real name. Someone else posted her old Wattpad stories, comparing them to my book. It wasn't even close. The stories she tried to claim as hers didn't match her writing style. Readers knew. And they made sure others did too. The final twist came when Jasmine herself emailed me.
No gritin. No epalegi.
Just one line. He said you'd never finish it. I stared at it for a long time. He said you'd never finish it. That was the root of everything, wasn't it? Owen's belief that I couldn't. That I'd give up. That he could take something I loved and break it just enough that I'd walk away. But I didn't. I finished it. And now, the only version the world would remember was mine. When I walked into my apartment that evening, there was a small box waiting on the doorstep. No return address. Inside was a charred page, the one Owen had given me, and a short note written in shaky handwriting.
I'm sorry. For real this time.
I know it doesn't fix anything. But I kept this page because part of me hoped you'd still make it. Even after everything. You did. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you keep going.
Oh.
I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just folded the note and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed him. And it wasn't something he earned by mailing me a piece of my own pain. That night, I sat down to begin my next book. Not as a reaction. Not as a defense.
But because it was time.
I wasn't the girl who almost lost everything anymore. I was the girl who rebuilt it, word by word. By the time I finished the first chapter of my new book, the world had begun to quiet down again, but the silence wasn't peace. It was suspense. Jasmine Wren disappeared from social media entirely.
No statements. No explanations.
Her publisher claimed the book had been delayed for creative restructuring, but everyone knew the truth, especially the readers. Every blog, every comment thread, every whisper behind digital curtains was filled with one phrase: she stole the story. And underneath that quiet, I was changing. My name had become something more than just a name. It had become a warning. I wasn't just the girl who wrote a good book. I was the one who'd survived the fire, rebuilt the ashes, and dragged the truth into the light. The publishing industry can be cruel. But now, it also watched me with a different kind of interest. The kind reserved for those who prove they're more than lucky. I had staying power. That made me dangerous. It also made me a target. A month passed. Emberlight continued selling steadily. More emails came. More speaking invitations. I said yes to only a few. I wasn't interested in turning my trauma into a brand.
I just wanted to write.
But one email stopped me cold. It was from a woman named Melanie Calder, a senior acquisitions editor from one of the biggest publishing houses in the country. Her message was polite, professional, and very direct. "Ray, we've followed your recent journey with great interest. If you're working on a follow-up to Emberlight, we'd love to discuss the possibility of bringing it under our imprint. Are you available for a meeting?" I read the email 3 times before responding. I wasn't sure if they wanted my story or the attention around it, but something in her tone felt sincere. So I agreed. We met at a hotel lobby cafe downtown. Melanie looked exactly how you'd imagine a high-powered editor: structured blazer, notepad always in hand, sharp eyes behind thin glasses. But she didn't waste time. As soon as we sat, she leaned in and said something I didn't expect. "We've had issues with Jasmine Wren before." I blinked. What kind of issues? She's used other aliases. Submitted multiple manuscripts to different agents at once. Slightly tweaked versions of other people's work. Slippery stuff. Nothing ever stuck. Until she found yours. My chest tightened. She never had enough of her own content to sustain a full book, Melanie added. That's how we knew. The bones weren't hers. She paused, then looked me straight in the eye. She didn't just plagiarize your story. She impersonated you. It took me a moment to process the words. What do you mean? She submitted the manuscript to another agent under her name. But in one of the drafts, she forgot to remove your initials from the footer of every page. RH. She claimed it was a stylistic choice.
But we didn't buy it.
Someone dug deeper. So, they knew? The publisher who picked her up. Eventually, she said. But by then the buzz had already started. Pulling the book quietly was safer than issuing a statement. Nobody wanted the heat, especially not now. I sat back in my chair. So much of the industry's silence suddenly made sense. They knew. They'd known for weeks. But no one wanted to say it. Melanie softened her voice. That's why I'm here. We don't want to bury this. We want to publish your next work properly, with the respect it deserves. And we want you to have control this time. I didn't answer right away. My thoughts were already spinning. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what had been done to me. I had a choice. I had power. And I could finally use it. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't want to rush. The last time I trusted the wrong person, I lost months of sleep, and a part of myself I was still rebuilding. But just when I thought the worst was behind me, another twist arrived, this time in the form of a voicemail. It was from my father. I hadn't heard his voice in months. He was quiet during the fallout, silent when the articles dropped, absent through the legal chaos. But his message was direct. Ray, I need to see you. It's about your brother. Please call me back. I almost deleted it, but something in his tone stopped me. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't defensiveness. It was something closer to fear. So I called him. He sounded surprised to hear my voice. We agreed to meet at a diner halfway between our places. It was the same diner he used to take Owen and me to when we were little. I arrived first and watched the door. When he finally walked in, he looked thinner, older, tired in a way that didn't come from age. He didn't waste time with small talk. Owen left, he said.
Took his things.
Didn't say where he was going. But he left this. He pulled a battered envelope from his coat pocket and pushed it across the table. I opened it. Inside were photos, screenshots, mostly of Jasmine. But not just her. Her face in Zoom calls. Her emails. Her real name. Her contact history. A timeline of when Owen spoke to her, how often, and what they discussed.
You don't get it, my dad said.
He wasn't trying to hurt you because he hated you. He did it because Jasmine told him she'd cut him in. Money. Credit. She promised they'd both be famous. I kept flipping through the pages. Messages from Jasmine to Owen, coaching him on how to handle me. Telling him what to say. How to act. One line hit like a slap. If she fights, we'll say she's unstable. That she's jealous. Make sure you keep playing the protective brother. She'll crack eventually. I pushed the folder away. My father sat quietly. I didn't know it was this bad. I knew he was angry, but I didn't know how far he'd go.
I didn't respond.
There was nothing left to say. When I got home, I tucked the folder away. I didn't want to read it again. It wasn't just proof of betrayal. It was proof of how easy it is to twist truth when the right words are used by the wrong people. But I wasn't twisted. I was clear. And now I had decisions to make. Do I go public with the folder? Do I reveal every piece of the manipulation? Would it help? Would it heal? Or do I let silence do what fire couldn't, cleanse the story without burning it again? I opened the blank document on my computer. I typed one sentence.
This is not a revenge story.
And then I began the next book. Not because of them, but in spite of them. Because the story was mine. And I still had more to tell. The new book took shape faster than I expected, like it had been waiting behind everything else. The words came quietly at first, then quicker, sharper. I wrote every night, sometimes until the sky lightened. This story wasn't like Emberlight. It was darker, but not bitter. It had shadows, yes, but it had strength too. The main character wasn't a hero, at least not one anyone saw coming. She was quiet, observant, and made of edges. Like me. But even as I worked on the manuscript, the real world refused to stay quiet. A month after that diner meeting with my father, an email arrived from a literary watchdog group. They had been following the Jasmine Wren incident, and they were now conducting a formal investigation into fraudulent author identities and manuscript theft.
They wanted to interview me.
I agreed, but only under one condition, that they leave Owen out of the public narrative. He had done enough damage, but I didn't want to watch him become a villain headline. Not for their sake, for mine. I wanted closure, not spectacle. The article dropped 2 weeks later. It was titled The Shadow Writer, How the Industry Almost Let a Stolen Story Rise. It laid out the timeline, the proof, the motive. It never mentioned Jasmine's real name, but those who knew knew. Her career in publishing ended with a quiet whimper.
No formal retracción. No epaledi.
Just the slow, pitiful fade of her digital presence. She deleted her Twitter, her website, her blog, like someone trying to erase themselves before someone else could do it for them. I didn't rejoice. I didn't smile when I saw her last attempt at a statement, just one vague post. Mistakes were made. I'm stepping away from writing for now. Thank you to those who supported me. Comments were disabled. Meanwhile, my inbox started to fill again. Publishers, agents, even a few film producers asking if the rights to Emberlight were still available. I ignored the last ones. That world was still too slippery, too loud. But one email caught my attention. It was from Melanie Calder again. She wanted to publish the next book, and she wanted to do it with a hardcover release. I read the message 3 times, then sent back a single line. Let's talk terms. The day I signed the contract, Lena took me out for drinks. She toasted loudly and clinked our glasses with a grin of someone who'd waited too long to say, I told you so, but didn't need to anymore. That night, we walked back to my place under a sky full of stars and silence. I thanked her again for saving everything I almost lost. She just shrugged and said, You were never going to lose it. You just needed to see how far someone would go to try. The next morning, I did something I'd been avoiding. I opened the old envelope from Owen again. I read the note a second time, slower this time.
I'm sorry. For real this time.
I know it doesn't fix anything, but I kept this page because part of me hoped you'd still make it. And then I flipped it over. Something I hadn't noticed before, a second page, folded behind it. A bank statement. One line highlighted. A withdrawal. A deposit. An address. At first, I didn't understand. Then it hit me. Owen had transferred the early payout from the fake submission to a separate account. Then moved most of it again. To a bookstore. To Inkwood Books. I called the owner the next day. He remembered the transaction. A large, anonymous donation made during the early days of my book launch to cover promotional expenses, store staff overtime, and extended hours for the signing. He hadn't questioned it. Thought it was some marketing expense from the publisher. But it wasn't. It was Owen. The signing that had helped launch Emberlight into the public eye, the line of people, the platform I had stood on, it had been made possible in part by the person who'd tried to burn it all down. I didn't know what to feel. I still don't. He hadn't asked for credit. He hadn't told anyone. He'd just done it quietly, in the only way he could manage. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was a gesture. But it changed something in me. I didn't forgive him. But I stopped hating him. Because sometimes people don't come back to apologize with words. Sometimes they just try to put one brick back after tearing down a wall. 2 months later, I stood on another stage, this time in a bigger bookstore in another city, with a longer line. The cover of my second book gleamed behind me on a large poster. Ash Vale. The sequel to Emberlight. My name, Ray Halden, was now on 2 titles. Halfway through the signing, I glanced up and saw a familiar figure near the back of the line.
Hoodie.
Head low. Hands in pockets.
Owen.
I didn't panic. I didn't flinch. When he got to the table, he handed me a book and looked at me, not with the smug grin, not with the guilt, just with something like understanding. He didn't say anything. I didn't either. I signed his copy, without asking what name to use. Just wrote, "For the ones who still watch from the fire." He nodded, and walked away. It didn't fix everything. But maybe not everything needs fixing. Some stories just need to end where they end. Now, when people ask me what my books are about, I tell them they're stories of fire and survival. Of people who lose everything and find something stronger in the wreckage. They nod. Some say it sounds powerful. Others call it dark. But one girl, at a recent signing, called it something else. She said, "Your books feel like revenge stories that never needed revenge. Like the victory is just existing after someone tried to erase you." And that's what it was. Not a comeback. Not a win. Just existence. On my terms. I keep the burned page in a frame now. On my desk. Next to the first copy of Emberlight and a letter opener shaped like a sword. A small reminder that I came through the fire. And that nothing anyone tries to take from me will stay gone for long. Because stories like fire remember. And so do I.